What would make Denny Hamlin tell NASCAR, "I will not go on the racetrack with those brake pads"? And why was he willing to accept a huge penalty just to change them? The answer starts with a brake problem at Iowa Speedway. But it quickly became a much bigger fight over NASCAR's rules, safety, and one question Hamlin believed the rule book had failed to answer. The problem appeared almost immediately in practice. Hamlin turned into the corner and suddenly lost consistent brake pressure. The pedal was dropping toward the floor, and that was a serious warning at a track where drivers have to attack tight corners at high speed. But Hamlin wasn't the only one. Chase Briscoe, Riley Herbst, and Bubba Wallace were also dealing with similar brake problems. Their teams spent hours trying to find a solution, and Hamlin's team eventually became convinced they were dealing with a bad batch of brake pads that created the real problem. Normally, if a safety-related component isn't working properly, you replace it. But NASCAR's rules made brake pads different. Teams are allowed to change certain brake components under safety circumstances. They can service the brake lines, and cracked rotors can be replaced. Some other components can also be changed, although penalties may apply. Brake pads, however, are considered part of the team's setup because teams choose their own compounds. So even though Hamlin believed the pads were defective, he couldn't simply replace them. And this is where Hamlin's argument became unusual. He wasn't asking NASCAR to give him an advantage. He was willing to make his own race much harder. He offered to start from the rear if NASCAR would let him change the pads. When that wasn't enough, he offered to start from pit road. Then he went even further, offering to accept another major penalty at Richmond the following week. His argument was simple: give me a punishment severe enough that nobody would abuse the rule. But let me remove equipment I believe could become dangerous. NASCAR still said no. And then Hamlin asked the question that turned the entire situation into a major story. What happens if I simply refuse to drive the car? According to Hamlin, NASCAR told him officials could impose a discretionary penalty that might be even worse than changing the pads during the race. Hamlin's response was essentially that he would have to slow down and survive if the brakes failed. That moment matters, because it reveals what the disagreement was really about. Hamlin believed there should be a clearly defined safety escape route. NASCAR had to worry about something else. What happens when one team gets an exception that every other team could eventually demand? Because if NASCAR allows teams to change brake pads after qualifying whenever they claim the pads are defective, the rule could quickly become a loophole. A team could qualify with one brake setup and then change it before the race. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a safety exception could become a competitive advantage. Hamlin understood that argument. He even acknowledged NASCAR's concern about teams having one setup for qualifying and another for the race. But he wanted what he called an element of common sense-specific exception for a genuine safety problem, with a serious enough penalty attached to prevent teams from abusing it. Then Sunday arrived. Hamlin's team made one final attempt to improve the situation, but the problem wasn't solved. Hamlin started from the rear and entered the race with almost no confidence in his brakes. He later described it as the worst mindset he'd ever had going into a race. Think about what that means. This was the championship leader, a driver fighting for a Cup Series title, entering a race believing his car might not stop consistently when he reached the corner, and then the brake pedal went toward the floor again. Hamlin said he had to pump the brakes repeatedly. Sometimes the pedal felt normal for several laps, then suddenly it would disappear again. He described driving with white knuckles, never completely sure where the car would end up when he entered the next corner. Chase Briscoe experienced similar problems, dealing with brake pressure that could disappear after a few laps. Yet somehow, Hamlin survived. Instead of finishing deep in the field, the No. 11 Toyota fought its way forward and finished fifth. Briscoe finished sixth. The driver who had entered Iowa hoping simply to survive had somehow produced one of his strongest results ever at the track. And that created one of the strangest endings possible. Hamlin wasn't celebrating like a driver who had just finished fifth. He was exhausted. Joe Gibbs said he had never seen Hamlin that exhausted after a race and believed his driver had driven his heart out. Hamlin even said he would retire if he had to experience something like that every week. But there was another side to his reaction. Despite everything that happened, Hamlin said he would take that day again. His team had somehow turned a situation that looked like a disaster into a top-5 finish. Now comes the part that makes this controversy even more complicated. NASCAR's position is that officials already have a tool for situations where a team disobeys an instruction. If a team changed the brake pads anyway, NASCAR could impose a discretionary penalty based on the circumstances. That could potentially mean several laps, or something much more severe. So from NASCAR's perspective, there was no need to completely rewrite the rule. From Hamlin's perspective, that isn't the same thing. He didn't want to knowingly violate a rule and wait to find out what punishment NASCAR would invent afterward. He wanted a clearly written safety exception that told teams exactly what they could do and exactly what penalty they would receive. And NASCAR had another reason to be careful. Imagine if the exception was created. The following week, another team says its brake pads are defective. Then another team makes the same argument. Before long, NASCAR could have dozens of teams asking for special permission to change setup components after qualifying.